He handed over his ID, and the teller threw it back without a word. The laminated card landing on the counter like trash dropped from height. And in that moment, everything in the room shifted, not because of what he said, but because of the color of his skin. No raised voice, no disruption, no reason, just quiet rejection cloaked in policy and cold smiles, the kind of humiliation that doesn't need to be loud to leave a mark. He didn't argue. He didn't plead. He stood still, steady, while the others in line looked away, some pretending not to notice, others smirking like they'd seen it before. What none of them knew was that the man they were dismissing held the fate of their entire institution in his silent hands. This isn't just a story about racism. It's about what happens when the people you overlook turn out to be the ones holding all the power. If you felt that, if you want more stories that don't flinch from the truth, hit like, subscribe, and let me know where you're watching from. What do you think happens next? Comment below. Gordon Latimer stepped into the bank of Alderton just after opening, the door's hydraulic arm sighing shut behind him. Outside, sleet painted the sidewalks like bruises, but inside everything gleamed. Floors polished to a mirror, air chilled to sterility, silence enforced by design. The scent of disinfectant mingled with burnt espresso, and the receptionist behind the front desk looked up only to glance at the time, not at him. She offered no greeting. Gordon walked past her without a word, his boots damp from the walk, leaving subtle half-moons of moisture across the lobby's glassy floor. He clutched a slim black folder, corners sharp, the kind issued only by firms that handled seven-figure legacies. The room's acoustics exaggerated everything. Each footstep, the flutter of a magazine cover turning, the mechanical tap of a keyboard, while a racing warmth. He approached the teller line, where 5 stations stood like checkpoints. Only one was occupied. Station 4. The woman there, mid-50s with tight curls and tighter lips, was painting her nails with a clear coat, fanning them dry between keystrokes. Her screen displayed a solitaire game in mid-progress. She didn't acknowledge him. Gordon stood silently, giving her space, the way one does with flighty animals or strangers' children. After 15 seconds, she looked up, blinked once, and without moving her head, pushed a clipboard across the counter. The form clipped to it read, "New customer inquiry, please print clearly." Gordon didn't flinch. He took the clipboard, turned it face down, and slid it back toward her. Then, from his folder, he produced a neatly stacked set of documents. Certified appointment confirmation, trust access authorization, photo ID, and the legal custodianship paperwork bearing the trust seal. He placed it on the counter gently, precisely, like someone placing something irreplaceable. The teller didn't touch it. She stared at the top page, her brows pinching together. Her hands drifted to a drawer beside her, retrieving a pair of blue nitrile gloves. She snapped them on, tugged at each fingertip. Then she picked up the folder with a 2-finger grip, the same way one might handle spoiled food. She thumbed through the documents too quickly to process them, pausing only at his identification card. Her head tilted. She examined the photo, looked up at Gordon, then back again, as if seeking a flaw. She set the ID aside and pressed a button beneath the counter. Her headset lit up. "I'll need to have someone take a look at this," she said, voice flat. Gordon said nothing. A small buzz echoed from behind the counter, and a junior manager emerged from back, a slim man in a blazer 2 sizes too big and shoes too expensive for his age. He approached without smiling, looked at the documents, then at Gordon. "Please have a seat in our client verification lounge," he said, motioning toward a section near the far wall. Gordon followed the gesture and saw what he meant. A bench. One bench. Metal-framed, padded with cracked vinyl. The lounge was adjacent to the emergency exit, under a wall clock stuck between 9:23 and 9:24. One of the fluorescent bulbs overhead flickered constantly. Gordon sat. He placed the folder on his lap, folded his hands over it, and waited. 20 minutes passed. No one approached. Staff behind the counter served other clients, smiling, gesturing, laughing quietly. A man in a tailored pea coat joked with his teller about cryptocurrency. A woman in pearls was offered a latte while she signed mortgage papers. No one looked at Gordon. At one point, the teller from Station 4 rose, walked over to the reception desk, and whispered something to the woman seated there. They both turned to glance toward the bench. The receptionist chuckled, then returned to her screen. Another 10 minutes crawled by. A security guard passed Gordon 3 times. On the 4th loop, he stopped and positioned himself beside the lounge area, arms crossed, eyes on the far wall. He didn't speak. A child entering with his father paused, pointed at Gordon, and asked something too soft to hear. The father pulled him gently forward. At last, the Blazer junior manager returned. "We're still reviewing your documentation," he said, with the tight expression of someone offering false courtesy. He didn't sit, didn't explain, just left the sentence hanging. Gordon nodded once. The clock still hadn't moved. Another woman arrived, tall, confident, red cashmere coat and designer heels. The receptionist leapt to her feet, addressing her by name. She was led immediately into one of the private glass offices lining the wall. Inside, a concierge placed a cup of herbal tea on the table. A personalized folder sat waiting. Gordon shifted slightly on the bench. Not discomfort, just breath. The teller from Station 4 had returned to her post, but this time wore a different expression. Tight-lipped, almost smug. She handled a stack of traveler's checks for a young man in athletic gear, then accepted a bouquet delivery from someone outside. Gordon remained invisible. After nearly an hour, the junior manager reappeared and approached the bench with a yellow slip in hand. "There's been a discrepancy," he said. "We're unable to verify the trust relationship at this time." Gordon extended his hand. The air outside hit Gordon's face like a slap as he stepped back into the winter morning. The same black folder under his arm, unchanged but heavier. He didn't look over his shoulder, didn't pause to check the slip that had been left beside him like trash. He crossed the avenue without hurry, weaving through foot traffic and ducking beneath scaffolding where pedestrians didn't make room. By the time he reached the corner, his breath had already softened, disappearing into the wind. He didn't slow his pace until he stood beneath the brass plaque of a smaller, older building 3 doors down from the bank, a notary's office that didn't open until noon. There, on the stoop, he paused only to press 2 fingers against the worn sandstone, collecting himself in stillness before turning and walking back the way he came. When Gordon stepped inside the bank again, the receptionist blinked. Not in surprise, but in mild irritation, like someone dealing with a smudge that wouldn't wipe clean. She leaned into her headset and whispered something too low to hear, her hand slipping beneath the counter as if preparing for a known threat. The security guard from before appeared before Gordon even reached the teller stations. He didn't speak. He simply took 2 steps forward, enough to make Gordon halt in place, and tilted his head slightly to the left. Gordon followed the movement and saw the junior manager standing halfway out of the side door, phone in hand, brows lifted in fake apology. "Sir, as we mentioned earlier, your paperwork couldn't be verified," he said, still not inviting Gordon closer. "We're asking that you handle this with the originating institution." His voice was louder now, projecting toward the other clients in the room. The words are cracked like a belt across concrete, meant to sound professional but dripping with warning. Gordon said nothing. He reached into his coat, pulled out the original letter bearing the trust seal, and unfolded it with surgical precision. He held it up, 3 fingers beneath, 2 over the top, not offering it, just letting it be visible. The manager's eyes flicked toward the receptionist again. She stood. The security guard stepped forward. "Sir, we're not going to do this," the manager said louder, his voice now echoing across the tiled space. 2 people in line turned to look. The man with the pea coat from earlier smirked and leaned toward the woman beside him. Gordon lowered the letter and slid it back into his folder. The moment was quiet again, but something had shifted. A second teller stepped forward now, a man with close-cropped hair and a prominent wristwatch. He approached the manager, whispered something, then looked directly at Gordon. There was no greeting in his expression, just calculation. "This is about the Latimer Trust," he asked. "That's the letter of execution you were holding?" Gordon nodded once. The second teller glanced at the manager, who only shrugged and said, "He doesn't appear on the system." The teller paused, then leaned over the terminal and began typing. He didn't invite Gordon closer. Instead, he spoke without looking up. "Can I see your ID again?" Gordon stepped forward and extended it. This time, there was no glass between them, no divider. The teller took the ID with one hand and held it up to the light, squinting as if searching for forgery. "It says here you're a designated successor," he said slowly, "but that doesn't mean you have access. Not automatically." The manager coughed lightly, then folded his arms and added, "especially if it hasn't cleared full internal review." Gordon opened his folder again, this time producing a second page, an authentication certificate issued 3 months earlier and signed by the firm that managed all asset permissions. The manager took a step back. "That document isn't part of our verification process," he said immediately. The teller ignored him and kept reading. "Where did you get this?" he asked. Gordon raised one eyebrow but didn't answer. "This isn't something that goes to just anyone," the teller muttered. "Most clients don't even know this page exists." He was still speaking, but not to Gordon anymore, more to himself, or maybe to the idea of the document. Then, abruptly, he set the papers down, pushed them an inch away, and stood straight. "You'll need to leave these with us," he said. "We'll follow up through proper channels." Gordon reached forward and retrieved every sheet, folding them neatly back into the folder. "That's not going to work," the manager said, stepping between Gordon and the counter. "If you refuse to cooperate, we have the right to report the attempt." He didn't say attempt at what. Gordon gave him a flat look, then turned and walked away without a word. He had taken only 3 steps when a loud tone rang through the air, the kind of dull chime used for alerts, just a tone, but loud enough to freeze movement. The receptionist answered a call, nodded once, and hung up. "Mr. Latimer," she called across the lobby, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You left something." He turned back, expression unreadable. The manager held up a yellow post-it note with nothing written on it. He extended it between 2 fingers and offered a smile, so brittle it barely clung to his lips. Gordon took it without touching his hand. "Have a great day," the manager added. Behind the counter, the teller was already speaking to someone else, his voice brighter, looser, completely transformed. Gordon exited through the same door, past the same columns, through the same air that greeted him with ice. As he reached the sidewalk, a gust of wind blew the post-it out of his hand and across the street. He didn't chase it. Instead, he crossed in the other direction and disappeared behind a delivery truck idling beside a hydrant. None of the bank staff watched him go. Gordon did not return home. Instead, he walked 6 blocks east, turning into a side street lined with shuttered cafes and scaffolding hung with old plastic sheeting. The sidewalks there were narrower, the windows fogged from the inside. He stopped at a storefront with a blank facade, pressed a 4-digit code into a hidden keypad behind a gutter pipe, and waited for the magnetic lock to click. Inside was a co-working suite owned by one of the law offices that maintained oversight of the Latimer holdings. The receptionist, young and overly perfumed, greeted him by name and handed him a sealed envelope without asking questions. He nodded once, opened it only after sitting, and read the single sheet of paper within. The wording was curt. The bank had flagged his account for irregular status, pending internal review. It was a line buried in bureaucratic language, but the meaning was clear. Someone at the branch had initiated a formal delay request. They were stalling not by accident, but by process. Gordon folded the paper, returned it to the envelope, and walked back out without a word. The wind had picked up. Trash swirled along the curbs like dead leaves, and the temperature had dropped 3 degrees in the hour since he'd last checked. He made no detour, no phone call. He walked directly back to the bank, arriving this time just before noon. The lobby was busier now, clients clustered in cliques, holiday flyers taped to the walls, small trays of mints placed near the ATM stations. The receptionist looked up, startled, then leaned slightly forward, as if debating whether to speak. Gordon didn't give her the chance. He moved toward the teller line, but this time, a tall man in a navy sweater intercepted him mid-step. The man's badge read branch coordinator. His expression was neutral but alert. "Mr. Latimer, we'll need you to wait in our client consultation area," he said, gesturing toward a glass enclosure near the rear of the lobby. Gordon followed without responding. The glass room looked like a meeting space, but had no table, just two chairs facing each other and a single frosted panel overhead that flickered occasionally. The walls let everyone see in, but no sound escaped. It was the kind of room designed to feel transparent while isolating its occupant. Gordon sat. The folder remained closed on his lap. Outside the glass, the branch coordinator stood speaking with the junior manager and the teller from earlier. They spoke in tight bursts, occasionally gesturing toward the room. At one point, the teller made a slicing motion with her hand, then shrugged. Eventually, the junior manager walked into the room with a tablet and a practiced smile. "We just need a few minutes to reprocess your verification," he said, as if nothing prior had occurred. Gordon didn't speak. The manager sat across from him and tapped at the tablet. "It's a simple mismatch," he continued. "There was an inconsistency in our records. Nothing intentional." Gordon said nothing, only watched as the man's fingers moved across the screen with the rhythm of someone filling time, not executing tasks. After 5 minutes of silence, the manager set the tablet down and asked Gordon to wait while they escalated the matter to the regional level. He left the room, closing the glass door behind him, and Gordon remained, surrounded by reflections. No one came for the next 30 minutes. Clients passed the room, occasionally glancing in, their expressions ranging from curious to indifferent. A child stopped to press his fingers against the glass, stared at Gordon like he was part of an exhibit, then was pulled away by his mother. Across the lobby, the teller laughed at something someone said. The security guard stood near the exit, posture relaxed but watchful. A new associate began decorating a holiday tree near the east wall, humming along to a jazz rendition of a carol piped in through the overhead speakers. Gordon continued to sit. His stillness drew its own gravity. Employees avoided looking directly at him, but their movements slowed when they passed the glass, as if checking to see if he was still there. No one knocked. No one entered. After 50 minutes, the junior manager returned and opened the door without stepping in. "We're just waiting on a compliance response," he said. "Almost there." His tone was cheerful, even casual, but his knuckles were pale where they gripped the edge of the door. He closed it again. At the hour mark, the receptionist walked past carrying a paper bag from the deli down the block. She stopped beside the manager's desk, opened the bag, and handed out sandwiches. The teller received hers and took a long sip from a branded cup before returning to her screen. No one offered anything to Gordon. Inside the room, the temperature had dropped slightly. A vent in the ceiling hissed cool air that couldn't be adjusted from within. The tablet still lay untouched on the side chair, its screen dim but active, running a generic welcome slideshow for first-time investors. Gordon remained as he was, still, measured, unflinching. At one point, the teller walked past the room on her way to the back office, pausing just long enough to adjust a framed photo on the wall beside the door. She didn't look at him, but the smirk tugging at her mouth made it clear she knew he was watching. Another 15 minutes passed before the branch coordinator returned. He held a printed form in one hand and a small envelope in the other. "We're going to mail you a copy of the final documentation," he said, still standing just outside the room. "We appreciate your patience." Gordon stood slowly, gathering the folder with one hand, and walked past the man without reaching for either item. He moved through the lobby with quiet, methodical steps. The receptionist said nothing as he passed. The security guard shifted, but didn't move. The glass doors opened with their usual hydraulic sigh, and Gordon stepped back into the cold without ever having raised his voice. He didn't look back. The door sealed shut behind him, muffling the inside noise. From the street, the bank looked quiet and clean and perfectly ordinary. No one would have guessed what had just happened inside it. The city's mood had shifted. Winter no longer whispered, it bit. Piles of salt crusted the sidewalks like frostbite, and wind tunneled between buildings with blunt fists. When he arrived, the receptionist inside barely blinked this time. She kept her eyes on her screen and simply pressed the button beneath the desk, the one that summoned the manager without anyone noticing. Gordon did not approach the teller window right away. He stood by the brochure stand for a full 5 minutes, reading the words on the plastic folds lined up neatly in tiers. Dignity in banking. Tomorrow's wealth today. Our clients are our priority. Each phrase was surrounded by images of wide smiles, interlaced fingers, and keys to homes that looked nothing like the neighborhoods Gordon had grown up walking past. When he finally moved toward the counter, the teller on duty was new, a young woman with clipped brown hair and glittery eyeshadow, who saw him, straightened her blouse, and whispered something to the taller male teller beside her. He took over immediately, stepping in front of her like a curtain being drawn. "Sir, we believe this issue has already been addressed," he said with no effort to hide the tired, rehearsed tone. Gordon handed over the folder again. The man didn't reach for it. "You'll need to speak with operations," he added, eyes shifting toward the back hallway. A moment later, the junior manager reappeared, holding what looked like a customer complaint form. "I believe you were mailed the outcome," he said, not offering a seat. Gordon looked at the form in his hand. It wasn't from operations. It was one of the blank slips used for customer comments, a decoy. He didn't take it. The manager exhaled and nodded to someone behind the glass. Moments later, a different associate came from the rear, a tall woman with a thin necklace and tablet tucked beneath her arm. "Mr. Latimer, follow me," she said in a tone so falsely polite it burned on contact. They walked past the teller line, past the brochure stand, into a narrow corridor lined with locked offices. She opened one and gestured inside. It was smaller than the last room and dimmer, lit only by a single track light above the wall art. The painting depicted a sunlit field, wheat bent under wind, the kind of image designed to suggest calm to anyone who hadn't lived through storms. On the table was a folder already waiting, unmarked. Gordon sat. The associate opened the folder and began flipping through a stack of copied documents. They were his, but altered. The trust seal was missing from the top page. The second page had a different issue date. His signature was absent from the confirmation form. At first glance, they looked similar, but the errors were deliberate, not sloppy. "According to what we have," she said, sliding the top paper forward, "your request was initiated without internal clearance. This version of the document doesn't show final approval." Gordon didn't touch the pages. Instead, he opened his own folder again and laid the originals beside the altered ones. The contrast was immediate. Real ink versus print blur. Clean seals versus pixelated stamps. The associate frowned, tried to adjust her tablet, began swiping through a portal he couldn't see. "There seems to be a mismatch," she said after a pause. "This may be the result of an outdated system upload." Gordon remained silent. The associate stood, left the room without taking the false documents, and returned 10 minutes later with a different folder, one he recognized from a prior visit. She opened it slowly, revealed a form with his name misspelled across the top, first name swapped with the middle, birth year off by 1 digit. "This is what was used in the Trust Access Verification System," she said. "Without a perfect match, we cannot proceed." She spoke as though this were policy, but her voice betrayed hesitation, like someone carrying out orders they didn't entirely believe. Gordon stood. The papers remained on the table. The associate moved to block the door. "Mr. Latimer," she began, "we ask that you don't remove any sensitive internal documents from this room." Her eyes were on his folder now, the real one, the correct one. Gordon didn't respond. He stepped past her, calmly, with the poise of someone already beyond apology. He folded the page twice, slid it into the inner pocket of his coat, and crossed the street to a bus stop bench already dusted with salt from passing plows. There, beneath the flickering bus route display, he pulled out his phone and scrolled through his saved correspondence with the trust legal firm, finding the archived email confirming his designation and time-stamped authorization. The date on that email was older than the birth year now attached to his manipulated account. He stared at the screen without blinking, then locked it, returned the phone to his pocket, and stood. He did not go home. Instead, he returned once again to the bank just after 2:30, when the post-lunch lull created fewer distractions and more visibility. The receptionist did not raise her head when he entered. The security guard from earlier had been replaced by a broader man with a bald head and heavy steps, who tracked Gordon from door to counter with the practiced stare of someone trained not to speak. At the teller line, Station 1 was manned by a sharply dressed employee with bright socks and a silver watch visible beneath his sleeve. He looked up at Gordon and froze for a fraction of a second too long. That pause was enough to signal that his name had spread. Gordon placed his folder on the counter without saying a word. The teller didn't reach for it. Instead, he stepped away and spoke quietly to someone just beyond the partition wall. That person emerged, another manager, unfamiliar, wearing glasses and carrying a metal clipboard. She didn't introduce herself. She looked at Gordon with a soft squint, then at the folder on the counter. "Let's take this to a review station," she said, gesturing toward the customer service wing. Gordon followed. They stopped in front of an unmarked door near the staff kitchen, which was open just long enough for him to glimpse stainless steel thermoses, mismatched mugs, and a box of catered sandwiches labeled VIP reserved. The manager led him into a small side room with no desk, only a high counter mounted against one wall and a single bar stool. She motioned for him to sit. He remained standing. She opened the folder and removed the documents, flipping through them as if they were no more important than menus, then set them down and pulled a printed log from her clipboard. "There seems to be a question of identification," she said without inflection. "We've received a notice from regional operations that your credentials may have been fraudulently issued." Gordon did not react. She watched him for a beat, then continued. "It's possible someone used your name to initiate access. Your signature matches, but that can be replicated." She paused, tapped the end of her pen on the page. "You wouldn't be the first person to attempt this kind of approach." She left the suggestion there, sharp and sour. Gordon reached into his coat and retrieved his ID again, placing it beside the documents she had just reviewed. She glanced at it, but did not pick it up. "Verification isn't about documents alone," she said. "It's about intent, behavior, compliance." Her voice lowered, took on the tone of someone offering advice to someone beneath her. "And right now, your behavior suggests conflict." At that, Gordon leaned forward and opened the envelope the bank had handed him earlier that day. He unfolded the page inside and placed it beside his ID. She read the sentence. Her face didn't change. "It's protocol," she said, "pending clarification." He took out a second document, his email printout, dated and signed by the trust's legal team. He placed it gently over the bank's letter. She looked at the 2 pages for a long moment, then gathered them, aligned their edges, and slid them back across the counter. "This office isn't equipped to mediate between internal and external records," she said. "If you believe the trust has made a mistake, you'll need to contact them directly." "The trust didn't make a mistake," Gordon said. It was the first time he had spoken all day. The sound of his voice echoed slightly in the small room. The manager blinked. She didn't respond. She stood, collected her clipboard, and left without closing the door. Gordon remained in the room for exactly 60 seconds before following her out. Back in the main lobby, a woman stood near the entrance holding a pastry box. She turned as Gordon passed and wrinkled her nose. Her eyes dropped to his shoes, which were lightly dusted with salt. She whispered something to her companion, who glanced over and then quickly looked away. At the teller counter, the sharply dressed employee was back at his station, now serving a man in ski gear who deposited a check for $15,000 without presenting ID. The teller laughed at a joke Gordon couldn't hear. He kept walking. As he neared the exit, he noticed a janitor moving toward the area he had just passed, carrying a spray bottle and a disposable cloth. The janitor wiped the counter where Gordon had set his folder, even though it wasn't visibly dirty, then pulled a fresh liner from his cart and replaced the waste bin under the desk. The symbolism was unsubtle. Gordon kept walking. Outside, the air had grown colder again. By noon, each envelope had been placed in a courier's bag, and Gordon returned to the bank with nothing left to lose. This time, no one moved when he entered. The receptionist kept her eyes on her monitor and the security guard, yet another unfamiliar face, barely glanced at him. Gordon did not hesitate. He walked straight to the teller line and waited behind a red velvet stanchion rope that hadn't been there the day before. The teller, Vivian Hargrove, returned to her station just as he approached. She wore a fresh blouse, pale lavender, and her hair was pinned tighter than before. Her smile did not reach her eyes. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, loud enough for others nearby to hear. Gordon opened his folder and removed a single document, the printed timestamp from the compliance system verifying his trust holder access, processed at headquarters that very morning. She did not reach for it. She waved her hand toward the seating area. "Please wait over there," she said, gesturing to a small wooden chair beside the lobby's trash bin. The chair had one leg shorter than the others, causing it to rock slightly when sat upon. Gordon did not sit. Vivian looked past him and raised her eyebrows toward the assistant manager, who gave a subtle nod and disappeared behind a door. Minutes later, two tellers walked past Gordon, giggling. One of them, a young man with copper hair and a university lanyard, glanced back and made a mock sneeze sound, then wiped his nose as he passed. They both laughed again. A woman with a child clutched her purse tighter when Gordon moved slightly out of her way. Her son asked her a question in a clear voice. "Why is that man still here?" The woman shushed him quickly, but her face flushed. Gordon remained still, eyes forward. The branch manager emerged 10 minutes later, flanked by the assistant from the hallway and a second associate carrying a clear binder. They didn't speak to him. They stood near the front counter and flipped through the binder, nodding occasionally, pointing at specific sections. Gordon was not called over. Eventually, the associate stepped forward with a folded piece of paper. "We've processed your request," she said, her voice mechanical. "Unfortunately, our system still reflects a mismatch in identity." Gordon reached for the paper. She hesitated before handing it over, releasing it slowly, as though concerned he might react. He unfolded it and found not a denial, not a confirmation, but a statement of non-alignment, a declaration that, while his documentation appeared valid, it could not be cross-referenced with existing client identity paths. The phrase meant nothing, constructed purely to sound official. He returned the paper to his folder. Behind him, someone coughed deliberately. The janitor appeared again and began spraying down the floor where Gordon had been standing. He worked slowly, wiping in wide arcs, scrubbing at invisible dirt. Vivian watched, a small smirk curling the edge of her lips. The velvet rope was moved slightly farther from the teller stations. Gordon now stood alone in a corner of the lobby, 3 feet from where anyone else could approach the counter. A middle-aged man in khakis and loafers walked in, greeted by name by the receptionist, and was ushered into one of the private glass rooms where espresso machines hummed behind glass counters. Gordon was offered nothing. No coffee, no chair, no apology. Gordon walked steadily through the snowfall, each step pressing deep into the whitened sidewalk, as though anchored by a different kind of weight than before. The check they had given him, $48.11, remained in his folder, untouched, unread, just another insult printed with professional ink. The bank behind him faded from view, glass and steel obscured by the thickening curtain of snow, but its memory clung to him like soot. He turned west on Adderley, then south 2 blocks, entering a part of the city where buildings no longer tried to impress. Offices here bore no nameplates, only quiet lobbies guarded by darkened glass. Gordon stopped in front of a narrow brownstone set back from a street, 3 stories tall, with ivy frozen against its brickwork. There was no sign, no buzzers, only a brass slit beside the door and a subtle camera I disguised as a brick mortar. He slipped a sealed envelope into the slot and stepped back. 10 seconds later, the door unlocked with a click. Inside was warmth, not the forced warmth of staged customer service, but the hush of filtered air and dense carpeting. A woman at the front desk nodded once, then pressed a single key on her keyboard. Gordon walked past her without speaking. At the end of the hallway was a set of frosted glass double doors bearing only 3 engraved initials: LHM. Behind them sat a room filled with low light and flat screen monitors, muted gray furniture, and a man in his 60s with silver hair and no tie. He rose from his chair as Gordon entered and extended his hand with no hesitation. Gordon accepted it. There was no ceremony, no welcome speech, only the firm click of a briefcase unlocking as it was handed over. Inside were 2 tablets, a biometric scanner, a flash drive marked with the trust insignia, and an embossed set of instruction papers folded in thirds. Gordon sat at the marble table in the center of the room and began reviewing the digital assets. The first tablet confirmed his identity through both fingerprint and retinal scan, unlocking a cascade of data. Trust balance reports, asset movement ledgers, board voting rights, and most notably, a list of custodial branches under Latimer Holdings. The second tablet displayed internal compliance timestamps from the past 4 days, each log documenting communications between Alderton Bank and the Asset Verification Unit. What he saw did not surprise him, but it did confirm everything. The bank had received validation of his trust authority 48 hours earlier. Someone at the branch had actively overridden that entry, filing a secondary flag that froze the request under suspicion of impersonation. The override wasn't automated. It was manually submitted. It bore initials, VH Vivian Hargrove. She had bypassed internal escalation by citing risk behavior and requesting a compliance freeze. That single entry rerouted the approval through a discretionary delay protocol, a protocol rarely used, but one that allowed her to block the transaction under active monitoring, a euphemism for suspicion based on demeanor. The paper Gordon had received in response, the $48 check, the identity mismatch letters, all of it stemmed from that one override. Gordon studied the full thread, each click, each digital footprint, each line of correspondence. The data stream contained archived voice logs as well, including one where Vivian described Gordon as confrontational, impatient, and unwilling to provide authentic proof of inheritance. The associate manager had then coded the encounter under client behavior alert level 3, triggering the suppression of future interactions. None of the logs reflected Gordon's actual conduct. None of them included the system-verified trust access he had presented multiple times. The bank hadn't just mistreated him. They had rewritten him. At the bottom of the screen was a button labeled, Initiate Custodial Shift. Gordon tapped it. A confirmation page opened. Transferring the trust's liquid assets and voting rights away from Alderton Bank required 3 inputs: biometric confirmation, trustee approval code, and manual signature. Gordon entered all 3. The screen pulsed once, then cleared. Transaction pending. 72 hours to full withdrawal. Below that appeared a notification prompt asking whether to deliver full audit results to branch-level leadership. Gordon selected yes. A secondary prompt asked whether he would allow delivery with no redactions. Again, he tapped yes. He left the office quietly, briefcase still in hand, eyes fixed straight ahead. Outside, the snow had lessened, leaving slush along the curbs and a dull gleam on the pavement. He did not stop for a cab or wait for a bus. He walked straight home, took off his coat, and sat at the small kitchen table in his apartment overlooking nothing. The trust would notify the board in less than 4 hours. The bank would be copied. Their response would come later, but the decision was already done. Gordon placed the check they had issued him on the table. He unfolded it. In the memo line, someone had scrawled adjustment final with the kind of flourish used to sign cards or thank you notes. He stared at the signature, not recognizing the name. He placed the check inside a worn envelope, sealed it, and wrote a simple message across the front in block letters. Return to sender. He would mail it tomorrow. He made tea. The water boiled slower than usual, the kettle whistling gently, a strange contrast to the velocity of the digital storm now in motion. The bank did not know yet what was coming, but soon they would. By the following morning, the emails had already landed. The branch's internal network, usually reserved for scheduling, policy memos, and customer updates, lit up with a flagged alert stamped priority internal. The subject line read, Custodial Shift Notification, Latimer Trust. The sender's domain was unmistakable, bearing the security watermark of Latimer Holdings Executive Operations Desk. The message was brief but absolute. Effective immediately, all management rights, liquid asset access, and portfolio oversight for the Latimer trust accounts would be transferred away from Alderton Bank. The bank was no longer a custodian, no longer even an observer. A 4-paragraph summary followed, citing breach of fiduciary conduct, unauthorized identity override, internal suppression of verified credentials, and conduct inconsistent with client management expectations. The entire team was included on the distribution list. No name was redacted. Within the hour, a second message arrived, this one encrypted and marked with restricted permissions. It contained an audit log. The audit detailed every internal communication tied to Gordon's visits, including chat threads between staff members, timestamped data access, and procedural delay flags. At the top of the report, Vivian Hargrove's override stood in bold, attached to a screenshot of her compliance entry and the justification she had written. Suspicious demeanor, unconfirmed documentation, potential misrepresentation. Directly beneath it in red was a comparative log from the Trust Central System confirming that Gordon's credentials had been cleared before the override was filed. The two entries sat stacked like accusation and proof. Every member of the branch could see them. Vivian did not speak that morning. She remained at her station with her hands folded in her lap, while the branch manager paced between his office and the lobby, whispering into his headset and refreshing his inbox every 30 seconds. The junior associate, who had laughed during Gordon's visit, now sat 2 desks away with his head tilted toward his monitor, eyes darting across the screen. The receptionist's phone rang twice, but she didn't answer. When Gordon entered at 10:42 a.m., he did not walk to the teller line. He walked to the private corridor where the branch's small conference room waited behind smoke glass. No one stopped him. He wore the same coat, same gloves, same measured expression. 2 men followed him, one in a pinstriped suit with a silver tablet, the other in a dark blazer carrying a hard-shell briefcase marked LHM Legal Services. They were not introduced. They simply passed through the bank like wind, shifting the atmosphere without fanfare. The conference room door closed behind them. A minute later, the regional director's name appeared on the digital sign-in screen at reception. The staff had not seen her in person for over 2 years. She arrived in a black coat with no jewelry, no heels, no smile, and walked straight into the room without speaking to anyone. Behind the door, Gordon presented the signed withdrawal order. The legal officer confirmed it with 2 key codes and handed over a slim manila folder bearing settlement figures. The figures weren't small. The Latimer Trust represented over $2.3 billion in diverse assets, with Alderton previously managing just under 17%. The withdrawal would not collapse the bank, but it would be noticed by their board, their investors, and their regulators. The regional director did not ask questions. She already knew the answers. She reviewed the audit, read the trust notice, and signed the acceptance form, her signature as sharp as the pen she used to write it. The meeting took 24 minutes. When the door reopened, no one emerged smiling. The legal team left first, followed by the director. Gordon remained a moment longer, standing just inside the doorway. His eyes passed over the lobby. Vivian tried to meet his gaze, then looked away. The junior manager lowered his head toward his desk, pretending to adjust his calendar. No one spoke. Gordon exited the bank without touching a single surface. He walked through the main doors, into the same cold wind he had entered so many times before. But this time, the door didn't close on humiliation. It closed on reckoning. Minutes after he left, the official notice was posted to the branch's internal bulletin. The staff gathered in hushed silence. Printed copies of the audit began to circulate quietly, some folded into briefcases, others left on desks, with the top pages still visible. Vivian's name appeared 6 times in the document. Each entry was paired with a procedural flag marked improper conduct pending review. She did not return to her station. The branch manager summoned her to the back office. She went without protest. 10 minutes later, the assistant manager followed, summoned by name over the intercom. He left his coffee untouched. The junior associate who had laughed at Gordon's presence was next. One by one, they vanished from the lobby, escorted behind glass doors that no longer offered protection. Customers continued to enter, unaware of what was unfolding behind the scenes. But the staff moved differently now. Their voices were lower. Their smiles faded quickly. They no longer laughed in the corner. The receptionist removed the red velvet stanchion. The janitor stopped spraying the area where Gordon had once stood. In the conference room, the settlement figures remained on the table, signed, stamped, final. In the system logs, the account had been reclassified from individual review to executive oversight. Gordon's designation was listed as principal beneficiary with full discretion. No further validation was required. Across the city, the Trust's legal office updated its site to reflect the custodial shift. Press releases were prepared. Investor bulletins were queued. The bank would be cited in each. The name Alderton would be included in the risk disclosure as an example of failed verification standards and breach of internal ethics protocol. Vivian left the building at 3:18 p.m., her coat zipped to the neck, her hair no longer pinned. She did not carry her purse. Her desk had been cleared by someone else. She walked to the corner, waited for the crosswalk, and kept her eyes low. The junior associate walked out 12 minutes later, his face pale and drawn, phone to his ear but silent. The assistant manager never reappeared. The branch manager remained until closing, door shut, lights off, computer screen glowing in the dark. No one spoke his name as they left. No one wished him good night. The power of silence now belonged to someone else. Heads were rolling. It named the branch specifically. It cited the Latimer Trust by designation and value, attaching a 12-page audit summary with every communication timestamped, every delay traced, every policy violation noted. The attached disciplinary directive listed 4 employees suspended pending further review, 2 placed on immediate administrative leave without pay, and 1, the assistant manager, recommended for full termination following an internal ethics board vote. The regional director, who had stood beside Gordon in the conference room just 24 hours earlier, had not only endorsed the recommendations, but signed a transfer of jurisdictional oversight to the Trust's preferred partner institutions. It was the largest financial reallocation Alderton had suffered since its rebranding 5 years ago. Word spread quickly, not through whispers, but through resignation. Employees throughout the district began reviewing their own client interactions, checking policy logs, rereading procedural manuals. The atmosphere across Alderton shifted from quiet confidence to defensive alert. At the branch, the doors opened at 9 sharp, but the energy had changed. Customers entered to find unfamiliar faces at the counters, staff on temporary assignment from other branches, loaned in while formal replacements were vetted. The receptionist's desk was manned by someone new, a man with the careful politeness of someone instructed to avoid conversation. The wall-mounted displays no longer cycled customer rewards or mortgage rate ads. Instead, they displayed a new training banner across the top: all clients, all rights, all the time. Vivian Hargrove did not return that day. Her termination had not yet been finalized, but her access credentials were disabled by 8 p.m. the previous night. Her login was recorded as having failed 5 times before the system locked her out. The assistant manager's termination was confirmed and processed that morning. His security badge was revoked, his pension temporarily frozen pending an appeal process. The junior associate had received a formal warning for professional misconduct and was placed on a 6-month performance improvement plan. His promotion track was rescinded. The branch manager had been demoted in function, if not yet in title. He remained in his office all morning, phone pressed to his ear, doors shut, blinds drawn. His computer activity showed multiple queries into legal liability protocols and client retention strategies. But his fate had already been decided elsewhere. At noon, a legal courier arrived and delivered 2 identical sealed envelopes to the branch's internal administration desk. One envelope contained final instructions for the manager's role transition to non-client-facing responsibilities. The other contained the signed settlement from the Latimer Trust, complete with transfer confirmations and exit interviews conducted by the Trust's legal compliance team. These were not requests. These were acknowledgments of completion. Gordon did not return to the bank that day. He had no need to. His presence lingered not in person, but in policy, in system flags, in audit logs, and in the unease that now moved like a ghost between the teller counters and break room coffee machine. In the early afternoon, a scheduled virtual meeting was held between the senior leadership of Alderton and the audit response team overseeing the Latimer account. The discussion lasted 43 minutes and included screen shares of the branch's security footage, call logs, and behavior flagging interface. At minute 32, the footage of Gordon being directed to wait near the lobby trash bin was paused. No one spoke for a full 10 seconds. The audit response officer resumed the footage and let it run until Gordon exited the building. The meeting ended with a compliance officer recommending quarterly reviews of all discretionary override privileges, removal of certain client risk assessment metrics from the training module, and the establishment of an anonymous reporting system for staff to disclose biased practices without fear of retaliation. These recommendations were approved within the hour. At 5 that evening, a public relations bulletin was prepared and reviewed by Alderton's legal counsel. It stated that the bank remained committed to accountability and fairness, that the company would continue strengthening its commitment to equal access, and that further improvements would be implemented based on lessons learned. The bulletin did not mention Gordon by name, nor the trust by value, but the message was unmistakable to anyone familiar with the story. The bulletin was quietly published on the company's investor relations site. It did not trend, but it was archived. By nightfall, Vivian sat alone in a diner 2 neighborhoods away, stirring a lukewarm cup of coffee she had not ordered. Her phone vibrated once more with a new email from HR, subject, exit materials. She did not open it. Instead, she stared at her reflection in the window opposite, barely visible between streaks of city grime and condensation. Her makeup was fading, and her blouse had wrinkled beneath her coat. No one spoke to her. No one sat nearby. The bank had not made her into a villain in public. 3 months later, the snow had melted from the sidewalks, and the light returned to the mornings in a soft gold that stretched shadows across the pavement. But what had shifted most in the city was not the weather. At the corner of Lexington and Maddox, where the Alderton Bank branch had once operated with quiet confidence, a new set of letters gleamed above the glass facade, modest but deliberate: the Latimer Initiative. The building had not been gutted or demolished. It had been repurposed, reimagined from the inside out. Gone were the stanchions and the teller counters, replaced by open workstations with curved chairs and consultation tables, where no barrier separated the advisor from the client. The frosted rooms had been removed entirely. The walls now bore artwork created by local community college students, each piece chosen not for price, but for the story it told. The marble floor had been buffed, but not to perfection. Some scuffs remained, reminders that history could not be polished away, only acknowledged. Vivian Hargrove arrived at exactly 8:52 a.m., her steps quieter now, her heels lower than they once were. She wore the same winter coat from the day she left the bank, but the sharpness in her stride had softened into something more grounded. She entered without fanfare and greeted the front desk associate, an older woman who smiled kindly but did not flinch when Vivian reached out to shake her hand. She was led to the intake department, not through a side door or a back hallway, but through the center of the floor where others already waited with clipboards and ID cards in hand. The room she was guided to had no glass, no two-way mirrors, only a desk, 2 chairs, and a large poster on the back wall that read, "Trust begins with dignity." Her position was part-time. She would handle document review and donation processing, part of a community outreach program focused on creating access for formerly unbanked individuals. The irony was not lost on her. For the first 2 weeks, she worked in silence, head down, voice quiet. She did not speak about her previous position, nor did anyone ask. Her job was simple but meticulous, and she learned quickly that the people walking through the doors now were not statistics or quotas, but neighbors, veterans, displaced workers, young mothers with strollers, and determination in equal measure. On her 3rd week, she handled an intake folder for a man named Halston, a sanitation worker who had never held a bank account. She treated his documentation with respect, even when the forms were incomplete, even when he struggled to remember exact addresses. She didn't smile performatively. She didn't patronize. She simply worked, and when he thanked her, quietly, sincerely, she nodded and said, just above a whisper, that it was no trouble at all. In the months that followed, she attended every training session the initiative offered. Implicit bias, equitable access, trauma-informed service. All things she had once skimmed through as checkboxes now became part of her vocabulary. She read the pamphlets, underlined passages, made notes in the margins. And though no one told her to, she began arriving early to organize the materials, set up chairs, and greet clients with coffee she brewed herself from the break room. One day, while sorting intake files, she came across a scanned copy of an old compliance log from Alderton, misfiled and yellowed at the edges. Her name appeared at the top, her initials beside an override code she could no longer explain, not even to herself. She read the note she had once written. Suspicious demeanor, incomplete verification, potential impersonation, and stared at it until her vision blurred. She did not shred it. Instead, she placed it in a sealed envelope, wrote accountability across the front, and left it in the office archive labeled reconciliation. She never asked if it was found. The junior associate, now working in a nonprofit's logistics department, had taken a demotion to keep his benefits. He lifted pallets, arranged shipping routes, tracked donations. The work was physical and repetitive, but not meaningless. One afternoon, during a break, he watched a man walk in carrying only a binder and a cautious smile. The man looked uncertain, but determined, and for a moment, the former teller saw a version of Gordon standing at the counter, not in suit and silence, but in principle and presence. He helped the man unload his paperwork, offered him water, and made sure someone reviewed the documents within the hour. He did not seek praise. He simply knew what it felt like to be on the wrong side of perception. The assistant manager had moved to another state, working in municipal payroll. His circle had shrunk. He no longer carried the certainty of systems protecting him, but he had found, in his own way, a kind of stillness. Once, he attended a conference on ethical compliance and heard a speaker mention the Latimer case without naming names. He sat quietly in the third row, listening to the story unfold from someone else's mouth, recognizing the details, feeling the weight of his part in it. When the session ended, he approached the speaker and asked for a copy of the report. He didn't say why. He just asked. As for Gordon, he didn't return to the initiative for ceremony or validation. He had no need to. His signature was now on the permanent endowment plaque inside the front lobby, beneath the words, "A place to begin again." He spent his time funding microloans through a silent branch of the trust, building access points where institutions had once closed doors. He did not announce himself, but the people who worked under the Latimer name knew who he was, not through gossip, but through policy. Every training began with the case file not as a horror story, but as a foundation, what had been, what must never be again. The final message printed on every ID badge at the initiative was simple, not a slogan, not a brand, but a truth. Justice is not an apology. It is a change in behavior, and change, once begun, does not end in silence. It continues every day in action, in choice, in the quiet dignity of doing right not because it is expected, but because it is owed. The end. If this story moved you or made you think differently about justice, power, and change, go ahead and like and subscribe to support more stories like it. I'd love to hear what you thought of the twists and the characters. What moment hit hardest for you? And where are you watching from? Drop a comment and let's talk about it.